Hello, this is Kyle, also known as Alien Dude, reviewing today this Balaur Arms Knight Templar arming sword. This sword is one that I bought secondhand using my own money, and it is available on Kult of Athena for $398 plus shipping and potentially sales tax. Now, this sword is made by LK Chen, which is based in China, so that price might change subject to tariffs. I believe Kult of Athena currently has them in stock and at that price, but if they have to restock at some point, my hunch is they won't bother restocking until the tariff situation settles down considerably. But it's also possible they would restock at a higher price. My point being, I don't know that that price is going to stay the same. I don't know if these will still be available after Kult of Athena runs out of their current stock. So if you do want to buy one, you might want to get on that relatively soon. I put a link in the description to where you can buy it. That is a Kult of Athena affiliate link, so I do get a small kickback if you use it. Feel free to ignore that link if you don't want to support me being an affiliate from Kult of Athena. That's your choice. Now, if you follow other sword tubers, you probably have already seen reviews of this sword. I know LK Chen has done a review, Matthew Jensen. I don't remember if Delatrix has done one or if I've just chatted with him about this sword. But the point is, there's a decent number of reviews of this model already out there. So chances are if you follow those other people, you already have a pretty decent idea of the quality of this sword, but I figure I wanted to get my hands on it and try it out for myself. So here's my review of it. And as usual, we're going to start with the scabbard. So this does come with a scabbard. It has a nice red color to it that's actually been on a good number of the LK Chen made Balaur Arms swords. It's a good quality feeling leather, but not quite as good quality as some of the things you'll find made in America. I believe Chinese companies have a hard time sourcing veg tan leather that is similar to what we are used to in America. It is overall a perfectly good scabbard. It is a bit chunky. This is pretty standard for the LK Chen Balaur Arms swords. It has a cross lasered into the rain flap here, a stainless steel chape with some decoration on it, a seam along the back. Overall, it's a perfectly good and attractive scabbard, just feels a bit heavy. And as for the fit of the sword to the scabbard, it slides in very, very easily. There's a little bit of rattle if I shake it around, and it doesn't have much retention. It slides in and out pretty easily. From what I've seen, this is decent because where I live, scabbard fit changes quite easily with the weather. And I find that a slightly looser fitting scabbard is better for me because it's not going to seize up and hold the sword in there. And this one at least has not had any issues with that at all. Moving on to the hilt, we have what I would call a type G wheel pommel with a pretty large and deep recess put into it, something that you could pretty easily fit a coin or something else like that into it as a marker that would really elevate the look of the sword, in my opinion, especially because the finish in that recess is a little rough. It looks very much like the cast metal that I'm pretty sure that is. It is stainless steel, and I'm pretty sure it's a cast piece. And the finish in there, like I said, it looks cast. And there's also some staining in there. So that recess is just a slight bit of an eyesore to me on this sword, and putting some kind of marker in there would vastly improve it. The corners of the pommel are all chamfered over beautifully. There's no hot spots here at all. And there's a good amount of dimension to this pommel. If you look at the side of it, you can see it starts thicker at the grip and tapers in towards the peen, which is something that you see on a lot of historical swords. You don't see very often in the budget reproduction market. And sometimes you don't even see that on higher end pieces. So it's nice to see that here. The pommel is peened on, and the peen is a little bit rough. There's some errant hammer marks visible. It's not cleaned up into a nice smooth circle or anything like that, but it's perfectly functional, and you don't need a great deal of attention to aesthetics here when we're talking about a sword at $400. It's not something that I think is really needed for the price. The grip on here has leather that feels very similar to the Scabbard. It's got the cord wrap texture, and just like the Scabbard, it's good feeling leather, just not quite as good feeling as the type of leather on the grips that I really like. It's not the same style of leather that you see in a lot of American-made products. And, that's understandable. It's hard for LK Chen to source leather. I believe they went to quite lengths to get the leather that this is, which I believe this is just something that I think I've heard at some point, sometime. I have no source for this, but I believe this is cow leather. And oftentimes grip leathers are pig leather or goat leather. That explains some of the differences. It has 5 risers on it, 1 on each end and 3 in the middle. And I like the look, but I don't particularly like the way risers work on the middle of an arming sword grip. It weakens my grip on the sword. It's something that's a personal thing here, but it's something I've noticed consistently, that when a arming sword has a riser in the middle of the grip, I just don't get quite as good of a grip on it. So that's something that I would prefer to see changed. And in fact, I wouldn't mind having that grip rewrapped with removing those risers there. The shape of the grip is excellent, though. It is oval, so it has a really good solid feel to it. You know where the edge is when you're holding it, and it does lock in my hand pretty well, but the risers do cause me to not have that great of a grip. I do like the grip. I just think it could be improved for my personal handling preferences. The guard is a type 1 guard, pretty much the simplest type of guard you can get. It's almost a straight metal bar. There is some taper to it, though. It does start a little bit thicker and taper out towards the ends of the quill ends. In addition, there's this cross engraved, etched, something like that, into it, which does echo the overall design theme of Knight Templar, and it carries through onto the blade, as you can see as well. The corners are all chamfered over very well. It's a very well executed crossguard, and the gap where it meets the blade is outstandingly well done, especially at this price point. You just don't really see swords fit to the guard that well at anything less than $1,000 typically. So kudos to LK Chen for really fitting the blade to the guard very, very nicely. And now it's time to talk about the business end, the blade. As usual, here's my measurements. So as you can see, this sword weighs in at 2 pounds, 11 ounces, a little bit under that, and features a lot of distal taper, which is something that is, frankly, absolutely necessary for this type of sword. You have a couple options here. You could start the blade thin and have very little distal taper. That is not necessarily a historical, but it does lead to a very thin and floppy blade that bends a lot. That's, again, not necessarily a historical. You could also start it at around the thickness this one does and not have much distal taper. You're going to have a sword that handles like a crowbar and is going to be no fun at all to swing around. Or you can do what this sword did, start nice and robust at the guard and have a lot of distal taper out so that it is balanced well and can move around the way you want while still having a good amount of power. I would say this blade fits into the Oakshot Type 11 that's the closest specification I would call to it. It could also be considered a 10A, but I think the blade length on this really does lend itself more to Type 11. It is a beautiful blade. There's just no getting around that. The lines are really clean, really crisp, and just has that really good look to it. You look at that and it's like, yeah, that looks right for this knightly arming sword. And the crosses engraved into the fuller, etched, I don't know the correct terminology there. However they put them in, they look outstanding. They really drive home that Knight Templar look, and it's just a nice touch on there. One of the things I really like about this sword is that there is a very subtle hexagonal cross-section past the fuller. Normally, at this price point, at this style of sword, you would see that be a diamond cross-section, which is inaccurate for the type of sword this would be. These types of swords were generally speaking either lenticular or hexagonal cross section and a very flat hexagonal. And this is a very flat hexagonal that you really have to look to see it. But when you do it, it just adds that extra little bit of detail that I really appreciate. If we look at the finish on the blade, it's a nice and even satin. There are some grind lines visible here and there, but nothing eye-catching. Looking down the lengths, you can see a decent amount of rippling here, especially in the folder. There's quite a bit of rippling in there, but it's all very shallow ripples. There's nothing affecting the structural integrity of the blade at all. In addition, the beveling here is outstanding, which is what I come to expect from LK Chen. They really know how to grind their swords so that they have a smooth primary bevel with no secondary bevel. Now, this is a secondhand sword. I don't know if the previous owner touched up the edge at all. To me, it doesn't look like it, but it is possible. But even if it is, it's still very cleanly done. So let's test the edge here so that you have an idea of how sharp it is when you see the cutting footage in just a moment. So I completely failed to start the cut there, which actually surprised me. So right out here, it's not quite sharp enough to bite into the paper. It did bite down much closer to the base. Yeah, so this edge seems to be a little bit duller than I would like to see. Let's test the other edge. So again, it's just barely struggling to bite into the paper. Once it starts the cut though, it does slice through very easily, as you can see right there. All right, I'm going to change things up a little bit and talk about handling before cutting, because I think the handling portion is really going to inform the cutting portion, more so than is usual with this sword. So the sword is balanced right about there, right at the second cross. I'll put it on screen what the actual balance point is because I found that I suck at estimating it visually. The point of percussion on the blade is right around here. Once again, I will put on screen the actual measurement of it. And in the hilt, it's right where I want it to be, right up at the top of the grip, a really good place for it. So you can see that the sword has a degree of flex, but really that flex is only in the last 6 to 9 inches or so. There's not a lot through most of the blade. So this is a quite rigid blade, which definitely helps delivering powerful blows. And this sword is designed for powerful blows. Type 11 is what I'm calling this. It really saw a rise in the 12th century, the early 12th century from what I remember. And this is when you had knights on horseback. You had a good deal of mail armor going around. You had, mail armor for the knights, not for a lot of the peasants they were fighting. You had knights riding by on horseback, chopping down at the opposing force. And that's what this sword is, in my opinion, primarily designed for. A nice long blade, a good amount of authority in the cut, and you're not really looking to accelerate the tip when cutting with it. You are looking to use the horse's momentum and then just chopping down, using gravity, and just obliterating peasants, frankly. This sword feels that weight. It is 2 pounds, a little under 11 ounces. It feels it. You saw it's balanced a ways out from the grip. It's not a nimble dueling sword at all. It can be used on foot. It can absolutely be used on foot, but it's not particularly pleasant to do so, at least in my hands. If you're familiar with my preferences, you know that I really enjoy lighter, more nimble swords, especially when I'm talking arming swords. I generally like compact arming swords, ones that max out at around 30-inch blades, possibly even shorter, like a lot of Type 14s. And this, with that 34-inch blade or so, it really does put weight out there. And you really have to think about controlling the sword and really pay attention to what I'm doing to make sure I have a good, solid understanding of where the sword's going and controlling it. The risers in the center of the grip, I do find they slightly weaken my grip on this sword, mostly because this is right where my middle finger rests on the risers, and it feels like I don't quite have as good of a grip based on that. This is a preference thing, but it is something that I notice affects my ability to control the sword. So on foot, this would have been used with a shield as much as possible, and I can see why. With this sword, you don't really recover the sword after the cut. You can, but it's a bit slow and clunky to do so. My thinking is you basically cut, have the shield blocking you, and then pull the sword back for your next cut. You're not really doing smooth, flowing motions. You are delivering powerful blows while the shield is guarding you and protecting you. I have no idea what I'm doing sword and shield, even less than I do just sword by itself. So this is absolutely even more clunky for me, but I do feel like this feels natural. This feels like the way this sword should be used, in my opinion, on foot. So for comparison's sakes, I really don't have many swords of this general style. The closest I have is this 10A.5 from Angus Trim, which is a wildly different sword, frankly. Considerably shorter, much lighter. This is right around 2 pounds. I think a little bit under 2 pounds, if I'm remembering right. Wildly different sword. This feels like a nimble dueling sword. It's still balanced a ways out from the guard, but it's just so much quicker and livelier. I can accelerate the tip with just the flick of the back fingers very easily, and the tip goes where I want it to go very easily. Wildly different design goals. This is a sword and buckler sword. That's what a lot of Gus's arming swords are. He really likes to focus on that style, and I can absolutely see that with this sword. This is not a cavalry sword. It could be used from horseback, sure. It could be used with a big shield, but it really does feel like a dueling sword, something that you're going to have a buckler and be delivering much quicker cuts with than the Balaur arms sword. So overall, when I picked this sword up right after holding the 10A.5, immediately struck by the girthiness of the sword. It feels that 3/4 of a pound difference, and it feels it out here quite a bit. Even though this has a good amount of distal taper and gets pretty damn thin out here, it's projected far from the hilt at a 34-inch blade. There's weight out here, and you feel it. The tip, it's not nearly as nimble. I can't move it around anywhere nearly as easily as I can with the 10A.5. Again, wildly different design goals, but this sword is absolutely designed as a powerful cutting and cleaving sword, not that nimble dueling sword. Now that you know how I feel about the handling of this sword, let's go back to cutting. And this sword cuts very, very well when I can use it right. I am, like I said, not particularly handy with this type of sword. It's really outside my wheelhouse, not the type of sword I enjoy using. But that doesn't mean I can't use it. I can, I just find it a little tiring. I find it difficult to accelerate the tip, a little difficult to control. Although I do think the risers, getting rid of those in the center of the grip, I think that would help my control of the sword a little bit more. But the point being, when I am able to use it properly, when I do deliver good cuts, this sword sings through targets very easily. Even though the edge is not super keen, it's certainly keen enough to do backyard cutting with no issues at all. I did a little bit of cutting with a shield because this sword would be used, if you're using it on foot, it would be used with a shield. I wanted to try that out. It is an interesting experiment because it adds a whole nother thing to think about when you're cutting. Normally, with an arming sword, I'm just thinking about my mechanics of my core and my arm. Now I have a shield on my offhand that I need to coordinate movements with. And where I really found that a bit difficult is in recovering the sword. Normally if I cut, I will bring the sword back around to something resembling a guard. It's a lot harder when you've got a shield doing that, but it works. In fact, I got some really good cuts with it. It definitely makes it a little bit more challenging to do, which makes sense. But overall, this sword is an excellent backyard cutter. All right, let's briefly touch on a few things that could be improved on this sword, at least what I think could be improved. We're mostly going to be talking about preferences here as opposed to things that need to be improved. First one, my biggest gripe with the sword is the grip. I don't like those risers in the center. I would rather see just a riser on either end and a smooth grip the rest of the way. Again, that's mostly a preference thing. The finish in the pommel recess, we're talking very minor things here. The finish there is ugly. I would like to see that polished up a little bit. Lastly, the scabbard, I would like to see it slimmed down just a little bit because it's a bit big and chunky. And that's really about it. There's not a lot of room for improvement here. Kult of Athena's design is excellent, and LK Chen's execution of that design is excellent. Once you accept what the type of sword it is, a big, powerful sword, probably a cavalry sword, or a big chopper with a big shield on foot. Once you accept that design, there's no reason to talk about, getting it lighter or closer balanced or anything like that, because that's not what the sword's designed for. This is an excellent design and excellently executed as well. Bottom line, this sword sells for, we'll call it $400. Is it worth that price? Yes, absolutely. If you watched other YouTubers review this model, I don't think you're surprised at that. This is a excellently designed sword. I just said that, and it's very well executed. I just said that. This sword is outstanding for what it is. At $400, it is a steal. This is one of the best swords you can get for less than $1,000, and it punches up there with the Albions. This is shockingly good at this price point or at any price point. Now, that being said, it's not my favorite sword. I don't like the way it handles, but that's my taste. This sword handles the way it should handle. It's just not the type of sword I really enjoy owning and cutting with and handling. And normally I would sell this sword once I'm done with the review. My philosophy for my collection is generally keep what I love, sell what I like. And I like this sword. I don't love it because I don't enjoy the handling of it, but I'm going to keep this one. At least I plan to keep this one because it's such a good example of both the type of sword and also what can be done, what is possible at a budget price. This is an outstanding sword for comparisons to other swords in this price range and to other swords of this type. So it's just such an outstanding sword, and it fits a hole in my collection that I don't have. Even though I don't really like this type of sword, it still is good to have one of this type, you know what I mean? So yeah, this is, even though it's not a sword that I particularly enjoy using, it is absolutely a keeper in my collection. If you like this type of sword, you owe it to yourself to check out Kult of Athena and really try to buy one before their stock runs out, because I don't know what availability of this is going to be looking like with what tariffs are doing to the sword industry, and who knows what's going to happen with that. So if you can afford to buy this now, I really recommend you do so. And that's going to wrap up this review. Thanks for watching. Until next time, Alien Toot out.